computer building. So I clearly remember the very first time I ever heard someone speak about building their own computer. I think I was around 14 or 15 years old at the time when I was playing an online game, and someone told me that they were actually playing on a computer they had built entirely by themselves. Now at the time, I was still playing on this thing here, which, as you can see right here, still ran Windows Vista. Ugh. So clearly, at the time, I didn't know anything about computers, apart from that they were like machines you could turn on, play some games on, and they'd always be laptops. I mean, laptops make a lot of sense if you want to have a computer with, you know, like a screen, a keyboard, and, you know, like a mouse pad thingy for a relatively cheap price. So when someone told me that they had built their entirely own computer, and not just built it themselves, but also made it from custom parts, I was convinced they were an absolute genius. Like, in my mind, they had taken some, like, raw materials like rocks or stuff, and they had turned that into one of these. And like, how could someone even do that? Now as I got older and more invested into gaming, what I learned that this guy had done wasn't actually put together a laptop, but rather a desktop computer, like those white towers from the good old days. You see, a laptop is fine if you want to type some emails or watch a movie, but if you want your PC to do some real heavy lifting, you need some big, beefy components with enough access to air to cool themselves down. And apart from, you know, always having your big sweaty hands all over the computer, which like always heated up, there is also another problem with laptops. Like, look at how small this thing is. Like, there's barely any room for like anything to breathe. And this is even a fake model compared to the things that you have today. So if you want to have a computer where there's a lot of room for these big, strong components with enough access to air to breathe, you're going to need one of these computer towers. Like, look at that size difference. I can't even like fit it on camera. Now this right here is the world of desktop computing. And as you can tell, it's quite different from laptop computing. You see, in order to make a laptop as small as it is, a manufacturer needs to like custom make every single part as tiny as possible in order to make this laptop be a laptop. As such, like every single component on this laptop has been custom fitted. So you can't really change out your keyboard if you don't like it, because this keyboard has been in particular made for this particular laptop. As such, these laptops are generally sold as, you know, models made by manufacturers, which you buy like from the manufacturer. However, because there is a lot more space in these desktop towers, you can fit a lot more general components into it, which means that you can actually pick and choose which components you want to fit in your computer to make it exactly the computer you want it to be. So whenever someone is talking about building their own computer, they're not talking about, you know, like building a full PC out of bare materials. What they're actually doing is what I would like to call adult Legos. Now, if I sound a little excited today, that's because today I'm going to be building my own computer. And I want to take you guys along for the ride to show you that's actually pretty straightforward and not that hard to do. Because basically what we're going to do is we're going to be taking each of these components and putting them where they belong so that we can have, in the end, a computer like, you know, we're building a Lego set. However, these Lego pieces can actually do a lot of really cool, complicated computery things, and they cost heaps of money. However, before we get into that, we should get into the idiot's guide to building a computer. Because if we're going to be building a computer, we're going to need a number of parts, like the CPU, or Central Processing Unit, big stinky names. This thing basically allows your computer to do all the calculations that it needs to do in order to like do pretty much anything. People also like to call the brains of the computer, which is somewhat accurate, because whilst this thing is like small but super powerful, it can't really do anything by itself, just like your brain. For it, it needs the motherboard, which basically is the body of the computer that allows the CPU to connect to all of the internal components and like the USB ports and anything that you plug inside of it. So with that, we now have the body and the brains of the computer. However, the CPU brain comparison isn't quite right here, because the CPU doesn't even know anything. What we're going to need is we're going to need some sort of storage that can store our programs, our files, and our operating system, which can allow our computer to run. So for that, we need this thing. Now, I know I've written memory on it. Some people would prefer storage. It's like memory storage, basically. But this thing will contain like all our programs, all our data that we can like, you know, plug into the computer. So this thing now can do something, can connect to things, and also know something, which is quite good. However, this is not enough yet. Because you know how when you're like tasked to do something, like calculate a really complex math problem, you don't just like know the answer instantly, but you first gotta like, you know, go over and be like, okay, so 1 + 2 times something equals 3, which means that something is, like, you know, you're just pulling whatever knowledge you have in the back of your head, you're pulling that to the forefront of your attention, and then you can calculate that X actually is 2, yeah. So what you find is the computer needs the same thing in the form of random access memory. Now these are like small memory modules that like allow your CPU to directly like pull and store data that it needs right now for it to function. So generally these things like go quite closely to the CPU in your motherboard, so you know the CPU can directly interact with it. Now with this we almost have a computer which should work. The only thing we still need is some power in the form of that power supply unit. This thing isn't really to scale, but you know, I just made it really small, but the PSU basically supplies power to the entire computer and allows it to run. Now with this, we're done. Almost. You see, you can't stop here. However, what a lot of people do like to do is add a GPU, or a graphics processing unit. Now basically what a GPU is, it's basically a smaller CPU on its own board that's completely dedicated to processing graphics from like video games or like doing some high level like processing like animations and stuff. This thing is very common because, you know, people like to have high graphics and it just basically takes a load off the CPU. So whilst a GPU isn't really a total necessity, a lot of people just like to have one in their system to just, you know, have something that looks good on your monitor. So with that, we finally have our full PC. We can basically, you know, put this in a case. However, that's what we're going to be doing now with the real stuff and not with this, you know, stupid cardboard stuff. However, I hope that like the basics are clear, like what kind of components a computer needs. All right, so now for the very exciting unscripted part of this video. You may be noticing that I'm wearing something right here. This right here is an anti-static strap. Now, you don't necessarily need one to like be building computers. What this thing does is basically like it decharges your static electricity, so that if you interact with like your motherboard components, your bare like PC components, you don't just like damage them accidentally because you're very statically charged and then, you know, you damage them. There's a really good video I'll link by Gamers Nexus which goes into more depth about this. Basically, like the chance of you damaging your PC components is really low, but it's better to just be, you know, safe than sorry. Okay, so let us begin with the motherboard. I know we started with the CPU in like the example, however, the motherboard is one of the best places to begin because this basically will be the ground plate on which you're going to be building your PC. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to open this thing up right here, and then we're going to go take everything out and put it on top of the like box. This is pretty much standard practice. Basically, it's just like a really nice surface to work on. I don't really know why actually people do it. It's supposed to be safer. Don't take my word for it because I can't really back that up with like any statements. It's just something that people do. So what we have right here is an Asus ROG X570E motherboard. Now the reason I went with this is because it fits my CPU that I'm going to be working with, but also because this has like a high amount of like expandability. For that, I need these PCIe ports which allow new things to be plugged into your computer to give it extra functionality. Furthermore, it has like a couple of slots for like storage where it like has an active cooler. And apart from that, which I also think is really cool, it has, as you can see right here, really good USB ports. Networking, look at that, 2 ports right here for networking, and it has built-in Wi-Fi, which honestly just like, it's really nice, especially because I'm going to be streaming a lot and I just want to have like good networking to my disposal. So now that we have the motherboard, it is time for the CPU. This right here is the AMD Ryzen 9 5900X. Now, basically, if you want to go get a CPU, there's a little something which a past me will explain to you. Basically, like, let's imagine you have a computer. I don't know how well it shows on camera because, like, I literally just drew this up like a moment ago. But if you have your computer, where you have like this, like the motherboard, the thing is that like a computer needs a processor to run, like kind of like the brains of the computer sort of thing. And you have 2 companies that make them. You have like Intel that can fit in there, and you have AMD. Now, Intel has always been like the big boy. Intel's always been, if you wanted to go for a powerful PC, you went for Intel. But last year, AMD has kind of beaten Intel. And not just beaten them, but they've also remained to be like better in price to performance ratio. So basically like Intel has a lot of catching up to do, and AMD is not just owning with the current setup, but they're also launching Zen 3 right behind here. And I'm quite curious because that might mean a lot more cool stuff, where like the difference may not maybe like this now, but maybe it's going to become like this. And I'm kind of in the market maybe for like a new computer. So basically every single generation they'll have like a new line of CPUs, which this right here is Zen 3, before that came Zen 2, before that came Zen 1. So just like you have with models, like you have like a Samsung Galaxy S9 or a Samsung Galaxy Note 9 or a Samsung Galaxy Fold. Basically, like all of these are from the same generations, but they're different models. Like such, you have an AMD Ryzen, which is basically like what they call their CPUs, and you have the 5000 series. And the 5000 series, before that came the 3000 series, and then you have like 9, 7, and 5. And 5 is like, I think 3 may be there as well. And the higher the number goes, the better it is. And I went with the 5900X because basically I think that's at most which I'll need. There is one more higher in the Ryzen line, which is the 5950X. However, the thing which I had before was an Intel i5 6600K, and I'll just like show the graph right here of like the CPU comparison. I think I'll like make some advancements here. There is like surprisingly little in this box. Like this box is just mostly like empty air. These things have been so desired over the last year because, you know, everyone's working from home and they need new computers that they were like pretty much unobtainable. Now, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to put the CPU in its socket right here. Now, as you're not going to be able to see because of like the glare and the plastic, this thing's got like a bunch of pins. It needs all these pins to connect to the computer and like work. Not a single one of these pins can be bent because otherwise we'll be in trouble. So what you need to do is you need to fit this Lego piece, this very complicated and expensive Lego piece, you need to fit that in here. Luckily, there's a bit of a guide as to how to do it. So first we're going to need to lift the arm up, which allows us to put the thing in place. What you have right here in this corner is a small little triangle. Then what you have on the motherboard is a small little triangle right there. So what you need to do is pretty much match the triangles. Triangle to triangle. It's easy. You know, I just plopped it in. Never mind, it's like a couple $100, and you know, if it goes wrong, then this thing is, you know, I'm kind of hyping it up. This is actually not all that scary, because all you do right now, because you like put it in, it's like you take this little arm right here, you put it down, like so, and now the CPU is installed. Alright, so the next thing we're going to install is the memory. When it comes to random access memory, there's a couple of things you need to know about it. What you find right here on this kit is a couple of things that tell you something about what you have. What you here have is some sticks, which has a 32GB kit. So these sticks together have 32GB of memory. It's going to be split up in 2 sticks of 16 gigs. But also what you have right here is you have DDR4, which is like the 4th generation sort of thing. They're building on a 5th generation, but basically like your motherboard and CPU is pretty much going to be limited to certain generations. So go with the generation that fits with the thing. As always, go PC part picker, check out whether it's compatible. But also what you find here is 3600. 3600 gigahertz basically is like the speed that it runs at. If you're gonna have like much more higher speed on your memory, but you can't really use it, you're just gonna like waste money on it. And basically if you're gonna have lower speed memory, your computer's gonna be slower as well. If you're gonna be installing 2 sticks of RAM, what you're gonna need is you're going to need to like choose which slot you put it into. And most of the time, the most common practice is that you put them like 1 space apart. So we're gonna put one here and we're gonna put one there. First, we're gonna go open up the clip right here that like allows us to put the thing in. And then we have the 2 RAM sticks installed. Alright, so now for the storage. Now, storage is something which is really important because what you want to do is you want to have a place where you can safely keep a lot of files and have enough storage for like all the files you need. Now, what I do is I make videos, which look at this right here. This right here is like one single project. So I need a lot of storage if I want to do the work that I do. However, what I also want to have is I want to have storage which is reliable. So this right here is like the old famous hard drive. Now, what's inside a hard drive is basically like a big spinning disk where like data gets written to, kind of like, you know, a good old record thing where, you know, the grooves, like you have the needle on there and like it knows what the kind of sound to make because the needle goes over the groove, and like that's what is in here. Instead, there's no needle that goes over grooves, but it's like a lot of like magnetic like things that are going on, which detects whether there's a 1 or 0 on the disk, and basically because of that, like you can store data on this disk. And with moving parts, there is a problem where like basically things can go wrong at some point in time, especially after prolonged use. They're a little bit less reliable than things which are like this, solid state storage, which basically means that this thing right here has chips which are like where the data bits get stored, where there's no moving parts, and with no moving parts there is less chance for failure. Now this right here is a new type of like SSD, because you can also get SSDs like in this form factor where basically instead of there being a disk there is like just like, you know, the solid stateness. But what you have here is you have a NVMe SSD in an M.2 form factor. Now the M.2 form factor, as you can see, is really fucking tiny. As you can see right here, there are some places with screws right here, and that is where you can put an M.2 SSD. Now if you've ever worked with like laptop memory, you kind of know how this goes. Slot it to the side, and you push it down, and like it will have some upward movement. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be putting in a screw that will hold it down. Push it down, place on the screw, Alright, so now we have all of these small components installed. There are still a couple more components to go. However, I like to do the small components first right here when I can access the motherboard from all different places. But now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be placing this motherboard inside a case. So the case I'm going to be using is this thing here, what you've seen me use before. It's the Fractal Meshify 2. Now, there's a reason I went with this case, because honestly, the case market, it's really big. What you find with your computer is that a lot of times you're going to be using some really strong components that use a lot of energy and thus get hot. These components need cooling. So what a case does is basically it encapsulates your components, but it also, because of that, kind of keeps them warm because you kind of have space within here, which isn't on the outside. So if you have components in here that get hot and you don't have a way for air to come out, it pretty much is just going to heat up and it's going to be a radiator inside. It's going to be really, really hot. So what you find with a case here is that this case, as you look at the front, has a big mesh grill where a lot of air can go through. Then if you open up the front, you will find that there are big bulky fans behind there, and you even have a dust filter. Don't worry, it's supposed to do that. You even have a dust filter inside this mesh thing. Because one thing that you'll find with cases that have a lot of airflow is that a lot of dust will build up inside them because, it sucks in dust for the holes that are in there, and you're going to be left with a system that may be a little bit cool, but it's also going to be dirty inside, which is also not going to be very good. Now, what has been really helpful for me for choosing this case has been Gamers Nexus, which is a YouTube channel very much focused around gamers and building computers for gamers and all the technology that goes around, the games industry and maybe more. The one thing that they did very well is they have gone over many cases. They do some very thorough case reviews, looking at temperatures, looking at all the features that it has, and with every single video that they do, they offer some alternatives, which may also interest you. I've gone over the list of many different airflow cases because I felt that airflow for my system build, which is going to be pretty high performance, was going to be very important. However, if your needs aren't necessarily airflow, but you want to have something else, go check out their channel, look for a case which sometimes looks pretty good to you. Maybe start out with this one, and then look for the video, see if you understand things, and then at the end, they'll make some other recommendations. They'll take you to other videos about other cases, and basically at the end there will be some other recommendations. And because of that, you can figure out what a landscape of cases looks like, which honestly is so big. All right, so now we're going to take our motherboard right here, and we're going to go and slide it in. Make sure that we put the I/O to the side, and then watch as everything fits. Watch the spin right here. This kind of indicates where our motherboard is fitted right now. Now, as you find, is every single one of these holes where the screws go in has a standoff underneath where we can screw a screw in. Make sure you check those because these things hold your motherboard in place, especially if you're going to move your computer around. If you're going to put it vertically, you want your motherboard to be very well put in. You don't want it to fall out. So what we're going to be doing right now is we're going to go grab the power supply. Now this thing right here basically takes in your power, and then what it does, it puts out it right here for all different voltages for all your different components. I like a modular supply like this because I can just plug in the cables which I need. I don't need to worry about oh, there's cables which I don't need right now because I don't have certain things. So I went with a Seasonic Focus. Seasonic is a very good power supply brand, but I went with an 850 watt version. Wattage basically comes down to how much energy is your computer going to use. Now, generally, people would recommend to get a good supply unit and get a higher rated unit than what you need with a lower unit, because if you have a too low wattage unit, basically your computer is going to fail because it's going to demand more power, but it can't get that. Don't get too much either because you're going to pay for wattage, and if you don't need to use that wattage, then you're basically overpaying. So be careful, make sure that you calculate how much you need for your system, and make sure you get a reputable power supply. To install the power supply, we're going to go and detach this thing from the bottom of the case, and this is going to mount on top of this thing here. Okay, and then we're going to go and install it back into the case. Basically, as you can see right here, we have the fan up top. I'm going to go move it down to the bottom because I like to have my fan spit out the warm air down under my system where basically my motherboard won't be. And I like it to just be out of my system and not having my system have to deal with also the heat from the power supply. Alright, so as you can see right here, we have all the cables installed, which means there are two more parts that we need to connect, which first of all is a CPU heatsink. Now, as I said before, we need some big, strong components that need a lot of room for air to cool down, because these things, like the CPU, are going to get really hot. But as you can see right here, there's not a lot of space on the CPU to really cool down. So we need to have some sort of cooling heatsink that is on top of the CPU. You need to have that installed. You can't just do it like this because that will destroy your CPU. Now, fortunately, I happen to have a heatsink. How convenient. This right here is the Noctua NHD15. Now, Noctua is quite well known for their fans and their cooling designs, which are in the PC world quite good. Alright, so I've read the instructions and basically we need to do one more extra step with this fan than you may normally need to do. In this case, you have these standard mounting brackets, which need to be replaced with these ones right here, because these things are custom for the heatsink that we're going to be using. Now I know that sometimes people like to show a time-lapse and then like screwing the screws right in and, you know, put a bit of music behind it, but I think you're perfectly well aware of how a screw goes into a hole, so here it is. It's done. So now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be applying thermal paste. Now thermal paste generally acts as like a conductor between the CPU and the heatsink, and basically allows like the heat to like more easily go from the CPU to the heatsink. Now a lot of times people believe that you need to have a whole lot of thermal paste to like have the heat flow through better. However, actually you need just a very little bit. I think that may have already been too much. We could scrape it up, or we could hope that this is gonna be good. As long as it doesn't come out, it should be good. Alright, so with the power of editing, that paint is done now. Look at that. I don't see any spillages, so what we're gonna do now is install these fans and then be done with the heatsink. So what kind of GPU am I gonna be putting in this giant system? Well, let me show you. This right here is an NVIDIA GTX 960, which is a GPU from a whole bunch of years ago. Honestly, right now, the reason I'm using this GPU is because pretty much the entire GPU market is still screwed. Basically, like, you cannot get your hands on any new GPU. So I'm going to be using the GPU of my old system. Hopefully I can install a 3080 or something like that when the time is right and when the prices come down. But until now, I'm going to be using this thing right here in the system. So basically, the GPU is going to be fitted into one of these slots right here, which right here is the PCIe slot. Now, I hope that this is going to fit, but we're going to find out. First things first, what we need to do is we need to take off a couple of these things right here. So these covers right here cover up any of the outside expansion slots for like the PC expansion cards that you're going to be putting in, so that right now we can install like our monitors to it, but if we're not using it, like this just covered up. So now we're going to be installing this thing right here. Now what you want to do here as well is you have this little clip, just like with the memory, which you're going to push down so that it can accept our card. Until it clicks into place, and then you know that it is installed. Almost. Because what it also needs is a bit of power, and that is the whole PC finished. So now it's time to turn on the PC. However, you can't just turn the PC on like this because there is nothing on it. There's no operating system, nothing that can like make it run. What we need to have some sort of operating system, which by default tends to be Windows, because people are very familiar with Windows, and if you're not using a Mac, people tend to use Windows. Turn it on. Right. It's working. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. If you have any opinions on how I should have done my build better, please be respectful in the comments below. And I mean, like, it's my build, it's not your build. But if you have something to teach me, like, definitely let me know down below. I'm not an expert on this. I'm just an idiot who enjoys like computers and stuff, and I enjoy putting one together. This is like my second PC I've ever built together. It takes a few hours. It's not like you'll just be waking up in the morning, just put a PC together in an hour. Maybe if you're like very, very familiar with this, but honestly, yeah, like, this takes a little bit. But it's fun, because now I have a computer. Anyway, I'll see you guys around, and yeah, see you next time. Also, this video was probably made on the new computer.